Are there any other elected officials in the audience that I may miss? Okay. Okay. All right. Okay, for our speaker tonight, Kevin Chatelier began his career as management and budget analyst with the City of Virginia Beach in 2008. He was promoted to senior analyst in 2014. He was promoted to budget and management service administrator in 2017 and named acting co-director of budget and management service in September 2019. Kevin, are you now officially the chair, the director of management and budget? Or are you still,
No, I am. I was appointed director or hired as director back last fall. So about August timeframe, I officially took the title and stepped out of the acting role to the actual director role.
The website needs to be changed because I took this off the website.
I was about to say,
let me your bio.
I was getting ready to say, that's really impressive you did that digging because, yeah, okay.
All right. So you're going to give us now the presentation that you gave the City Council on the budget, and then he will be answering your questions. Please, there's index cards that you can get, write them down, and we'll collect them, and we'll ask those questions after he's done with his presentation. Is that good with you, Kevin?
It is. About how long were you thinking for the presentation? I believe I did it to City Council in about 25 minutes.
That's good.
Okay.
Yep, that's good.
Okay.
All right. It's all yours, Kevin.
All right. Thank you very much. So good evening, everybody. Joining me on the Zoom call, and I appreciate everybody for being flexible and taking the time to set it up so we could do this virtually. Joining me is Regina Born-Delgado and Caitlin James. Those individuals are my administrators within the department, and they're the individuals that really keep the day-to-day going up here. So I wouldn't be able to put the budget together without their assistance. So they're here as well. Katie coordinates the CIP, and Regina coordinates the operating budget process. So at the conclusion of the presentation, we'll be certainly glad to have the Q&A and answer questions you might have. So with all that being said, I'll share my screen, and I should be able to. So it doesn't look like I'm able to because it just said it's been disabled. So let me. Diana, is that something that you know how to?
We're doing it now.
Okay.
I thought they would have done that.
I didn't know we had us go in. Put it on. All right, try now.
There we go. Yeah.
Okay, can everybody see that? Okay. All right. So I'm going to walk through the presentation I share with council, which is the city manager's FY21-22 proposed operating budget and capital improvement program. So there's a few things, to highlight. It's hard to believe it's been about a year since I was doing this a year ago, right about the time the COVID-19 pandemic really came to light and became a reality for a lot of us, in that, they canceled March Madness, the NCAA tournament. Just a couple of days after that, I went up and was presenting the current year's proposed operating budget. At that point in time, knowing good and well it was dead on arrival. So we literally went back in over a 2-week period. We revised revenue estimates down, and we slashed $67 million out of the original proposed FY21, the current year's operating budget. City Council then took that revised budget, and they put some additional restrictions in place to try to position the city in a manner to be flexible, as there was just a lot of unknowns about where we would go and what the local economy would look like. Because of the steps that were taken, reducing the baseline budget so much and the restrictions City Council put in place, we're in a really good position as a city moving forward in the planning of the FY 21-22 operating budget and CIP, as we'll have the capacity to address several initiatives put out there by City Council as to what are the priority areas needing funding. So I say that's important because I'll come back to that $67 million that we cut out of the budget in just a little bit. Moving, let's see if I can do this here. There we go. This slide here is covering just some of the actions to date that City Council has. Can you all see that unobstructed?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. So this includes some of the actions that City Council's taken to date to provide assistance and relief within the community. Beginning at the beginning of the pandemic, they provided a meals tax holiday. They deferred or delayed penalties and interest and due dates for several taxes, real estate and personal property. They also provided relief efforts with that, with a $2 million allocation, as well as provided $4 million for city service bill relief, water, sewer, stormwater, those type relief bills. United Way and partner agencies, City Council was able to redirect some of the CARES Act funding that was provided to the city and provided to United Way through an agreement. And United Way has been able to reach several businesses and individuals across the community. As being a nonprofit, they have less red tape to deal with than what the city can. They're able to utilize those funds more freely. So City Council made the option and the choice to provide them with the federal relief funds and allow them to utilize that to provide relief. Some additional contributions to nonprofits that was handled with one of the rounds of the CARES Act funding that was actually administered by the city for several nonprofits that applied for grant assistance. Some additional efforts include $6.6 million in small business grants. And probably the most recent one was City Council's decision to suspend the ABC license tax in calendar year 21, $300,000, and providing relief to those businesses. So regarding FY22, some of the highlights in the budget I want to touch on, City Council had, we engaged them earlier in the process this year to try to get a sense of what some of the priorities areas were that we should focus on in developing the 22 operating budget. So they were very clear in terms of the revenues that there was to be no tax increases. The 22 budget accomplishes that. In addition to that, they were very clear that we were to look at alternatives as opposed to the ERU increases. That's the equivalent residential unit for stormwater. There's a planned rate increase of 3.5 cents to address and pay for stormwater needs, flooding needs across the city. We were able to defer that and delay the implementation of that for another year. I'll speak more to that, especially real estate, in just a moment. In looking at expenditures, the 22 budget's able to maintain current services, as well as providing additional services that were outlined in focus areas outlined by City Council as being priority areas in need of additional resources to meet growing demands. In terms of compensation, the operating budget includes a 3% compensation increase for city employees, as well as preserves funding, $3 million for a market salary survey, and the survey was approved by council to be conducted. The 22 budget is setting aside funds for the potential implementation of a portion of that market salary survey should findings come back that key city positions are out of alignment with the market and the region, making it difficult to fill those positions. The 22 budget also places a focus and emphasis on recruitment and retention efforts of hard to fill positions. I'll speak more to this in a minute, but going into the budget, we knew that there's several out there, such as police officers, engineers, certain IT positions, and we were certainly able to ECCS, Emergency Communication Services, Citizen Communication Services, or E911 call takers. Those are other hard to fill positions. So the budget was able to set aside funding, put programs in place to begin addressing those needs. A closer look at revenue. Some of the highlights and takeaways is that it's already been released, so it's not news to anybody in the room likely, that we're proposing, the city manager's budget proposes our real estate reduction at the rate of 1 cent in the real estate tax. The stormwater ERU rate, as I mentioned earlier, that's been deferred or delayed by another year, so the rate will be remaining at 49.3 cents. Something the board probably back up and talk about with the real estate. Whenever the decision was made to provide real estate tax avoidance of this 1 cent in the rate, it equates to about $6.2 million of tax avoidance citywide to businesses and citizens. So it's really something that covers a good portion of the city. And on average, it's anticipated to result in about $26 a year for individuals living in a median assessed home through the city. Regarding the ERU, the 3.5 cent increase results in about $12 a year annually. If that were to take place, so city council is clear that there was not an appetite for that in the current economic reality. So that was also deferred. Something important to note is that the waste management fees remaining where it is currently right now at the $25 per month, even though there's consideration by SIPSA, who the city contracts with for waste disposal purposes. There's consideration of increasing the tipping fee from the city of Virginia Beach, currently pays $57 per ton to dispose of waste at the landfill. There's discussion of increasing that to $61 a ton. Even though there's that consideration going on, the decision was made not to increase the fee as that's not a known at this point in time. And should the fee actually go up and the waste management fund not be able to absorb that cost increase throughout the year, we would likely be approaching city council to request utilization of some of the waste management funds. It operates as an enterprise fund, and we'd be requesting to use some of the fund's fund balance to cover that cost in the short term. Some other considerations or inclusions in the operating budget, and I'll speak more to these in a little bit. The extension of the hotel flat tax for the tip fund is set to sunset in December of 2021. And so the decision was made to include it in the operating budget with an extension of 6 months, or request to extend it for 6 months to support tip fund related services. Again, I'll speak to that more in just a little bit and the services that's going to cover. And looking at the short-term rental program, the budget includes a proposal to establish a $200 a year fee for the short-term rental operation. Again, I'll speak to that more a little bit in the services that fee increase is going to cover. I covered this a little bit in talking about the real estate, the tax avoidance being $6.2 million through a 1 cent real estate reduction. Something important to highlight here is that as a result of the city school revenue sharing formula, that reduction of $6.2 million is being shared between both city and schools. You can see there that the city's share of that reduction is about $3.3 million, with school share being $2.9 million. The 3.5 cent ERU reduction, rate increase that was deferred, was about $3.1 million. That was deferred in additional revenue to support stormwater services. It's important to note that the 22 budget, even though it deferred it, there's not a negative impact anticipated in meeting stormwater needs or flooding needs next year. Instead, the short-term plan is to utilize some of the fund's existing fund balance to support those needs in 22, and that'll come in the manner of purchasing one-time costs in the operating budget with the use of that fund balance, as well as utilizing it to support capital maintenance needs in the CIP. Again, something important to note is that this is a short-term fix to what is a much bigger long-term need and solution with the flooding needs and flood mitigation needs in the city. And they need to revisit the previously approved plan. 3.5-cent ERU increase each year will need to be returning to that soon to maintain the existing program we have. So something we do each year as part of the operating budget is that we look to take into consideration what the average tax impact is or tax burden is on an average household. This is something that's included in the city's executive summary on page 28 and 29, which gives a more detailed breakdown of this. Based on the assumption of a median house value, 2 cars assessed at $8,200, which is the the average vehicle assessment in the city, and the typical consumer spending. We're anticipating the typical tax burden or tax increase on a typical family to go up about $118 per year or next year compared to the current year, or about $9 per month. This table here notes a lot of information to digest, but all this is doing is comparing our existing rates with rates across the region. You can see Virginia Beach is the lowest in all the categories, with the exception of cigarette, automobile, and obviously the solid waste, as Chesapeake doesn't have a solid waste fee established. So this is a look at the 22 estimated revenues. You can see that the total estimated revenues are $2.2 billion. That represents a 6.1% growth over the current year's adopted numbers. So something that's important to talk about in that growth is that earlier I had noted that we reduced the current year's revenues down by $67 million when we adopted the operating budget. And a lot of that estimate was done due to a great unknown of where the pandemic and the revenues were going to bottom out. We have a much better sense of where we are. Revenues are trending better than what we had initially thought that they would. So we're more confident in our revenue projections now. And it looks like we were a little either aggressive or conservative, whichever way you want to call it, in our revision down in the current year, as revenues are actually outperforming that and closer in line with where we ended last fiscal year and closer to our actuals. So I know that the 6.1% seems like a lot of growth comparing year to year. But again, that's just because we were had reduced so much in our base in the establishment of the 21 budget. So a few of these to note that are higher than what you expect to see compared to the typical year-to-year comparison. Personal property at 9%, general sales at 15.3%, business license 14.9%, restaurant 7.6%, hotel 26.7%. And this slide here, instead of comparing the adopted 21 numbers with the 22 next year's estimated revenues, this is a different look at those revenues. So what this is actually doing is comparing our 22 proposed revenues for those sources I just mentioned with the 20 actuals. And you can see that this gives a much closer representation of what we're actually used to seeing in year-to-year growth in these revenues. So looking at personal property, we're anticipating a growth of about 3.8% compared to where we ended FY20 actuals General sales is largest of all these at 7.3%, comparing the 22 with the 20 actuals. Keep in mind, though, this is over a 2-year period. So that's the 20 actuals where we ended up, how revenues are performing in the current year, and then where we're projecting them to be in 22. So the 7.3% could seem like a lot, even comparing this. However, general sales is just performing better than I think what most people expected it to perform. General sales is collected and it's on a 2-month lag. So at the point in time I gave this presentation, we had just received the most recent general sales numbers that were provided to us in March, and that was for the sales of January. And they were up, January sales were up year over year by about 14% in comparing those 2 months year over year. So it's not something that's just unique to Virginia Beach. Those of you that follow it are probably also seeing the states reporting similar things in this. So it's really just overperforming better than what most people thought that it would. And looking how those $2.2 million are broken up into, for purpose of appropriation or expenditures, you can see that this is the pie chart here. Education represents about 46.9% of the $2.2 billion budget. And then the next two biggest slivers of the pie are planning, public works, public utilities, or the infrastructure related departments. And then the third largest sliver is public safety, coming in at 11.7%. This is another look, more granular look at the expenditures by expenditure category. And this is being broke down by both city and schools. So the city's 22 budget's about 1.2 billion, with the schools being about 1.04 billion. So something that's important to note is that of the total 6.1% growth, the city's growth is expected to be about about 4.2%, I believe, with the schools growing at about 8.4%. The reason for the schools' 8.4% growth, and you can see it up here and looking at their operating expenditures, is largely being driven by their receipt of additional grant funding through the CARES Act. The schools had a much longer period of time to utilize the grant funding. City Council had a shortened time window to use their CARES Act funding. And so when they did it, they appropriated it, reimbursed the city. And as I noted earlier, they got it out the door to the nonprofits to be spent in the community. Schools, on the other hand, had a longer time frame to utilize this. So they're able to stretch it across to meet the current fiscal year needs, as well as what needs will be out there in FY22 as well. So they've included the reappropriation of some of that in their FY22 operating budget, resulting in the largest increase here in the operating expenses, and primarily the driver for the 12.9% increase there. Just for note, whenever I talk about the schools CARES Act funding, the amount that they're reappropriating that was unused in the current year is about $24 million. So some expenditure highlights. Earlier I had noted stormwater. The stormwater continues to be a primary focus of the city, and especially of City Council, to meet flood needs across the city. So there's been the request for the establishment and addition of 2 new crews, a BMP crew, or Best Management Practice crew, to provide enhanced maintenance efforts at BMPs to meet MS4 mandated requirements, as well as the establishment of a pipe cleaning crew within the Department of Public Works to begin proactively rather than reactively maintaining and cleaning stormwater pipes across the city. This crew would be on a rotation and plan to clean every pipe in the city at least once every 5 years, as well as CCTV view and scope every pipe once every 15 years. So the FTE authority was requested in the operating budget. However, we're also looking to make sure that that's the most efficient means of delivering those services. It's determined that the FTE authority is not necessary, then we might be approaching City Council to perhaps redirect some of those for the purpose of putting in place a contract to get the private sector to do that if the capacity exists out there. Something else included related to stormwater is within the planning department, and FTE has been added for the purposes of reviewing complex stormwater plans in the Development Services Center. And within the stormwater CIP, there's been enhanced funding for the canal maintenance and roadside ditch program both. Also a new project to the stormwater CIP section is a stormwater project administration CIP project. And this is really for the purposes of improving the management and overall delivery of projects within the stormwater section. Some other areas with growing demands for services is short-term rental program. The 22 budget includes additional staffing for that within the planning department. That's 2 FTEs, as well as some contracted manpower dollars and resources to implement a third-party software to better track and allow better enforcement of the short-term rental program. With that, the planning department will also have access to a 24/7 call center, which they'll be able to use for enforcement purposes if residents or individuals have concerns, questions, or need to report, they'll be able to call into that. Earlier, I had noted the establishment of the $200 per year short-term rental fee. The $450,000 to be generated from that will be utilized to offset the cost of this, the increase in planning's budget to support these positions and these contracted manpower positions and needs. In addition to that, the fee will also completely support the 2 existing FTEs in the planning department and contracted manpower dollars that are currently in place to allow planning to be able to use the fee to completely offset the manpower and FTEs associated with implementation of that program. Also in 22 is an FTE that was added to the finance department for further implementation of disparity study. There's been a recent change in the review of construction contracts that's resulted in a increased workload in the review process, and this positions to help initiate those and work on the SWAM initiatives. Hilliard Hines, the need, the recovery efforts related to 531 have certainly been put on pause in wake of the pandemic, but it doesn't mean that there's not work to be done and it's not something that's been forgotten. So in 22, we're intending on trying to continue to further that initiative by implementing recommendations to the Hilliard Hines independent study. And something that we're looking to do is provide counseling services through a contract in-house. These services were previously provided through the VB Strong Center, which was grant funded. Grant funding's coming to near end. And once it does, those services are going to need to continue. So the 22 budget has funding included to continue that through a contractual arrangement. In 22, 6 additional FTEs are being added to HR for the purpose of centralizing HR functions and efforts, as well as developing a threat assessment team. And there's also a CIP project for security, city security enhancement, and $2.9 million is programmed in that project to enhance city facilities and security efforts, as well as allow the Office of Emergency Management to further refine and put plans in place as to what and assess what the city's true security needs are. Resort initiatives. Earlier, I had noted that there was the recommended extension of the hotel flat tax within the tip fund. It's a $1 per room night charge. That's to support these enhanced initiatives at the request of several resort groups. There's a request for enhanced entertainment efforts. The 22 budget includes $1.5 million for that within the TIP fund. In addition to that, there's the establishment of 2 new crews within the Department of Public Works, a beach ops crew, as well as a streetscape maintenance crew. That's 7 FTEs, and those will also be supported within the TIP fund. In 22, we're anticipating the opening of the Burton Station Fire and EMS Station. The anticipated opening date of that's in spring of 22. So the budget anticipates the need to hire or has provided resources to increase or hire 30 firefighters and 7 EMS paramedics with a start date of January 1. So half a year funding for these positions. These will be used to staff the new station to come online. Something else, I previously noted this, the hard to fill positions. Going into the process, we certainly knew that there was needs within the police department as they're carrying a higher number of vacancies. It's a known issue that's been going on. So to try to address that, in the 22 budget, we redirected some resources within the police department to allow for the establishment of a police department cadet program. The idea and the thinking of this program will be to reach out and engage individuals who are interested in becoming a police officer earlier before they're actually police officer age. Right now, there's a gap that exists. So individuals can officially become a police officer until the age of 21. So this is meant to engage them at an earlier point in time to see if they're really interested and to prepare them, and hopefully it'll lead to a higher success rate with the running of each academy for these individuals that successfully go through the cadet program and then the actual police officer academy. ECCS, or Emergency Communication Citizen Services. There's the request in 22 to redirect some of those resources within the department and the vacancy savings for the purposes of trying to develop a recruitment and retention program or enhance those efforts through either incentives, bonuses, whatever it might be. But ECCS is looking to work with HR to further refine that and put a plan in place. And then also there's other hard to fill positions that are known throughout the city. And our hope is that the market salary survey will be able to help identify those and perhaps give us a sense of what some of the gaps might be. And if in fact there is a Virginia Beach pays out of sync or out of scale with what the actual market is, which could help improve attracting and retaining qualified individuals to fill those hard to fill positions. Some other initiatives that are noteworthy. The housing department has a pilot program for the purposes of trying to revitalize existing neighborhoods. Currently right now, individuals are falling out of the qualification parameters of state and federal programs. So this is looking to utilize some local funding to fill those gaps and those needs and allow the city to use those to proactively maintain and keep neighborhoods from becoming, deteriorating, becoming important, maintained condition. Library program, our libraries is looking to run a pilot program to waiving fines and fees on youth accounts, as they did some research and determined that late fees and penalties are a deterrent on youth, resulting in the overall low participation utilization of libraries. So that we're going to be monitoring that over the next year. If this has an impact on that. Sandbridge recycling program is being established, and 1 FTE to support that, which will be funded through the Sandbridge SSD. And the 22 budget also includes the full funding and the annualized cost for the expansion of the police department's body-worn camera program, so that every sworn police officer, field police officer, will have access to be able to utilize a body-worn camera. Regarding compensation, the city's continuing existing policies that are in place, which include the city's public safety workforce development program, shared pay parity, as well as supervisor midpoint adjustments. So that's really to address vertical compression. An example of that might be that an individual is in the police department or fire department, and they're now being asked to supervise someone who it makes more than them. It's called vertical compression. So the goal of the supervisor midpoint is to get the individuals who make it to the supervisor role to the midpoint of their pay range much quicker to keep them from being vertically compressed. As I noted earlier, the 3% increase in employer contribution and health insurance is included in the 22 budget. That's about $1.5 million within the general fund. The proposed budget has taken the recommendation of the Benefits Executive Committee in that it's requesting a contribution on the employer side for both city and schools. However, the recommendation is to maintain and keep employee contributions flat in terms of premiums for next year. And the contribution to cover that cost is going to come from the fund balance of the health fund. As the city and schools are self-insured, the fund balance of the health fund is about $70 million. I noted earlier that we had set aside funding for the potential implementation of market salary survey. That's the tune of $3 million. And also the city has proposed a compensation increase of 3%, and the schools a 4.5% increase with a 0.5% step. So a combined 5% increase for schools. So I know it might seem like there was a lot of FTE adds that were mentioned, but overall, there really weren't a whole lot of net increase positions. So taking into account the 37 FTEs for Burton Station and the 21 for stormwater that I mentioned, the city's really overall net growth between city and school combined is 54.26 FTEs. So as you can see, majority of those are from just these two initiatives alone. The city manager made a very concentrated effort to be judicious in the addition of FTEs and only adding where he felt that it was necessary, as there was a redirection and repurposing of several vacant FTEs across the organization. Keeping in line with the framework the City Council established in the adoption of the current year's operating budget, the 22 budget is proposed to maintain the same level of flexibility. The budget does not utilize attrition savings, as that's the city's capacity to be able to absorb the unknowns. Say another wave comes or a lockdown happens and the economy shuts down again, the attrition savings is something that could be utilized to prevent furloughs or reduction in other city services that we were able to avoid because we had attrition savings in the current year and the closure of last year. And so with that in mind, attrition savings have not been fully utilized in the city manager's proposed budget. A $20 million emergent need reservation has been placed against the city's general fund. This is not an appropriated reserve, but just a reservation of the general fund balance. Even with that reservation in place, the projected fund balance of the general fund is within the city council 8 to 12% a range, and it's estimated to be 10.4%. And also something important to note is that the proposed budget does not rely on does not estimate or rely on the next round of stimulus funding that is projected to come in to the city. So I'm going to quickly go through the CIP and then I'm going to move on to the questions portion, as I know, there's a lot of information in the operating budget. And so I'm not trying to give death by PowerPoint, but it's a lot of information. It's a really good budget that we have in place. Meets a lot of cities' needs. So as far as the CIP goes, the total CIP over the 6-year period is $1.8 billion. You can see here that the large portion of the highest stormwater with 23%, and the next largest is schools at 20%. Schools actually made the most significant increase comparing year to year in that schools program. A lot of additional funding in their CIP for the purposes of modernization and school replacement efforts. Some of the more notable ones I'll get to in a minute, because I'll actually touch on those in the school CIP. This is just providing a breakdown by revenue source of the 6-year CIP. Year one being a $423 million capital improvement program plan. Year one is actually the only year that's appropriated. Years 2 through 6, you can see there. You can see there by the asterisk that it's noted this is for planning purposes. It's not appropriated. It's not capable of being spent until it is appropriated, but it's years 2 through 6 are out there for planning purposes. The highlights, I previously noted some stormwater initiatives, the canal management, roadside ditch, as well as the stormwater management program. I previously mentioned those. Another noteworthy project is a $2.3 million increase for the purpose of continuing the city's master drainage study. Getting back to schools, I noted that they had a significant increase in their proposed CIP compared to last year. So schools, between these three initiatives, are proposing an additional increase of $127 million, which will provide additional $32.5 for Princess Anne High School replacement and fully fund the replacement needs of that facility within the 6-year period, as well as providing the full funding for the B.F. Williams replacement and partial funding for the Bayside High School replacement. Some economic and tourism development initiatives that are noteworthy are a $6 million increase to the Virginia Beach Innovation Park infrastructure, which will run roadways throughout the entirety of the park, as well as a permanent establishment of a 31st Street stage canopy for the resort area. Some roadway focuses, or a little bit of conversation about roadways, by far the most complex section of the CIP. A couple of noteworthy, but certainly not all of them. Projects fully funded over the 6 years: Pleasure House Road, as well as Nemo 7B. And some projects noteworthy received additional state and federal support of those Holland Road projects: Lathrop Road Phase 3 and Northampton Boulevard, Diamond Springs. And, there was discussion previously, and City Council had been informed of it. VDOT had made some reductions in their SIP, or their 6-year improvement program, which was going to negatively impact the construction schedule for several Virginia Beach projects. The 22 proposed CIP was able to fund the initiatives and the projects through agreements with VDOT and not impact those construction schedules. Some other noteworthy IT-related information technology, the establishment of a project to put a ECCS, or 911 call center backup site out of, it's to build in redundancy should the main building go down. The backup site would provide emergency backup services. Enhanced funding for the purpose of cybersecurity, replacement of courtroom technology. Some of the technology within the courthouse is the original technology that was put in place in 1994 with the construction of parts of the facility. Electronic voter poll book replacement, poll books that individuals see whenever they go to vote. The poll workers are working on those poll books. Those are 5 years old and nearing the end of their useful life period. And there's also some increased funding for the purposes of modernizing technology needs within libraries. So this is just some key dates. We were talking about the presentation format. The meetings are going to be taking place throughout the month of April. So you can certainly watch those meetings and receive budget briefings they'll be provided by each department to City Council as well as the CIP. So this certainly isn't the first or only, or the only initiative or viewing that you'll be able to get through a presentation of the 22 budget. Several more to come. Some noteworthy dates: public hearing dates, April 21st and April 27th, with council reconciliation to be May 4th and the ultimate adoption on May 11th, which is ahead of the state requirement adopting a school budget by May 15th. And so that is all I had. I know it's a lot of information. I certainly know it can seem overwhelming, but I'll certainly be glad to answer any questions that the group might have or talk through any of the slides.
Okay, so we'll start with questions. Why must responsible, compliant, registered short-term rental owners pay $200 a year to find and monitor non-compliant short-term rental owners? The city and state already receive 16.5% in straight tax revenue. That sounds like charging gun owners a fee to police illegal gun owners. Could you hear that?
I heard it. So the first part was, why is the fee necessary?
Yes.
So I mean, the fees necessary to support the additional enhanced services, in a sense, the fees acting as a bill payer for this, that it really seen a growth in the demand for services, and planning department is struggling to be able to keep up with. I certainly understand that there are those that are in compliance, but there's a need to sustainably fund the increased efforts and costs associated with that program, as it's becoming a very difficult thing for the planning department to be able to keep up with and implement consistently. So it's certainly something that's being considered. It's not necessarily approved ultimately until City Council adopts the operating budget. So, that's a legitimate question that could certainly be redirected or directed towards council at one of the two upcoming virtual public hearings.
Okay. Second one, if I emailed you tomorrow, could you please provide the source that stated that Sandbridge Civic League said it was okay to use sand money for additional recycling, or did that come from our council representative?
So it's the information that was provided to us was that it was at the request of the Civic League in their interaction with the Public Works Department. So I certainly don't want to say that it was a representative or an elected official, but I don't know if minutes are taken at those. So I don't know what type of document I would be able, but I would certainly be able to get the individual in contact with someone in Public Works who staffs or attends those. And we could certainly go that route.
All right, thanks. What does the 1% lodging fee increase of short-term rentals lodging pay for?
The $1 per night hotel tax?
1% in
Philip Kellum sent out a letter today that we received. Short-term rentals are now going up another %. So now Sandbridge is paying.
short-term rentals are going up another 1%.
Yeah, so Sandbridge pays 10.5, and now regular city Virginia Beach pays 9.5. 4%.
Yeah. Want to know what the Sandbridge 1% is going up for? What is it going to pay for citywide?
The Sandbridge 1%?
No, she says it's citywide. So Sandbridge is going up to 11% and citywide's going up to 9%. 9.9%, whatever. They got a letter from Phil Kellum on it.
Are you talking about assessments?
Lodging tax.
Oh, okay. It's ringing a bell. I know exactly what you're talking about now. Okay. So The 1% lodging that is being put into place, so that's actually not a city established increase in the lodging rate. So this is something that was adopted and put in place by the General Assembly last year with the adoption of the current year's operating budget at the state level. So this 1% is to be applied regionally, and the 1% is for state supported initiatives and purposes. And it's not actually a 1% that will be coming to the locality for the purposes of retaining it for use in the general fund or Sandbridge SSD or anywhere else.
Okay, so you don't know what state, I think it's going to transportation, isn't it?
I think you're right. And I don't have the specific program that it's going to, but I do think it's going to a regional entity.
Transit. Okay, short-term rentals. You're going from $50 a year to $200 a year. Plus today I received a letter. Oh, this is the one you just asked. Never mind. Okay. Please explain the automatically lowered property tax rate and the proposed increase in the rate included in this year's budget. Usually if your assessment goes up, right, by state law, you're supposed to lower the tax rate proportionately. It doesn't really lower it to make it revenue neutral. So then I want you to explain that.
Okay. So and I actually had received a question about this the other day, and so I just was double checking with the city attorney's office on this. And so the thing that was throwing me was the automatic. So there's two ordinances or two tax rates that have to be established every year as a part of the city's operating budget by state code: real estate and personal property. So there's no real automatic lowering of it. A rate needs to be established every year. So the city attorney's opinion is their office's opinion is there's no automatic lowering of that. The reference to that is with the public hearing ad and the requirement by the state to run a public hearing ad if assessments grow by more than 1%. And if they're to grow by more than 1%, then there's the requirement to run a public hearing ad, which has to go through specific calculations of visually demonstrating that in the public hearing ad. So what it has to do is it has to take the current assessment base, so not new growth, but the base of what the last year's real estate levy was, what that comparable amount is going to be for the upcoming fiscal year, compare those, and then in comparison of those, then that's whenever you then back into what the neutral rate would be. If you were to go establish a tax rate at that amount, the neutral rate, then you would not receive $1 more in revenue compared to with what you had received the previous year based on the same assessment base. I know it's a very complicated state requirement and law that creates a lot of confusion as to what the requirement is for that. And you know, the other way of thinking about it is, if it's not for assessments growing by greater than 1%, that calculation in public hearing ad does not have to take place.
So since we are having that public hearing, we are having an increase in our real estate tax because it's not being lowered enough to make it revenue neutral, correct?
That is, yes, I agree with that. Yes. Okay. So the reason for that is, you know, there's a reason why in the presentation we note that it's tax avoidance. It's not tax reduction. Assessments, and we're very, you know, we put that in there. in the operating budget, you know, the tax burden is going up, and the large driver of that is because the assessments are going up. Citywide assessments and real estate are growing 3.7%. So, you know, the 1% reduction in the proposed budget certainly does not offset all of that growth.
Okay, this one says, does the finance director have the ability to answer questions from citizens when he or she emails them to you? So I know you said finance director, the budget director, those are two separate positions, right?
They are. I mean, I would imagine that the finance director has ability to answer questions, especially if, you know, if it's related to, I know finance in the past has answered questions related to pension liabilities and things of that nature, where there's a, you know, specific request or ask questions being asked. So they've certainly responded in the past.
Okay, well, I'm sure they meant you, so you're able to
Okay.
answer the questions.
And we've certainly responded to questions as well.
Okay, what are the annual credit financing costs? Does Virginia Beach still have a AAA rating?
And Diana, I got the last part, the AAA, and I can answer that. Yes, Virginia Beach still has a AAA bond rating, and which we have the highest credit rating that can be received. And what was the first part of that question?
What are the annual credit financing costs? Credit financing costs?
Do you mean how much we pay in debt service every year?
Yes,
It's about $180 million citywide.
$180 million citywide.
Mhm. That would include public utilities, stormwater, the TIP fund, and the general fund, and schools. It would be everybody.
Okay, how much is allocated to the planned reduction of net pension liabilities for schools and city workers in the 2022 budget?
So in terms of the pension liability, so VRS, the city doesn't have its own retirement system like the city of Norfolk does and some other localities. The city's part of VRS, so Virginia Retirement System. So Virginia Beach's contribution into that system is actually set and established by VRS, and it's determined what the city's contribution towards that is to be by the state. So the contribution that the city provides is a fixed rate as to what they set. And so the budget is at 16.29%, Katie. So the VRS contribution or the amount budgeted for each position is 16.29% of their salary. And that's the amount that goes towards to pay VRS.
Okay, what is the total number of new FTEs in the proposed budget? At what total salary cost of these new positions?
I don't have the total salary cost. The net change is the 54.26 that I had noted, with, you know, several of them on here from the slide, 37 being public safety and 21 stormwater. But again, it can be kind of difficult to capture that to the dollar because several positions went away as well. So I don't have the aggregate amount for these, but I think the last time we ran the calculation, and I am going off of complete memory here, is it about $54,000, Katie, is the average like salary and compensation, or no,
Like 72, 54 is probably the average salary.
salary? Okay. Okay. So fringe and benefits is probably roughly around $70,000 on average, but that's citywide. That's not just specific to these. I mean, you can imagine there's engineers, other positions, there's, and then, you know, custodians or waste collection drivers, or there's a range of what the pay scale would look like.
Okay, you said stormwater continues to be a focus of the city council, or experience shows the opposite. Where do you see that it is the focus of city council?
The related to, and I'll go to the, sorry, I'm flipping through these quick. So stormwater still continues to be the largest CIP section. City councils redirected resources towards stormwater management efforts, and especially the flood mitigation efforts, with establishment of 2.5 cent real estate dedications for that purpose, as well as the number one primary discussion that they've been having, especially at the retreat. And the focus for a while has been the discussion of a possible bond referendum to continue to keep stormwater needs, and especially neighborhood flooding needs, on the table as the primary discussion, and potential need to address that in the shorter term rather than the longer term.
Okay, please go into detail about what enhanced entertainment will be funded by taxpayers and why it is needed now.
The enhanced entertainment.
Yeah, I guess that's what that.
Yeah.
So
the enhanced entertainment that was added in FY22 was an increase of $1.5 million. And this is within the TIP fund. As most of you are probably familiar, the TIP fund is a fund, tourism investment program. It's a fund that has several dedications that support it through various tourism related revenues. So hotel, meal tax, cigarette tax, amusement tax. And so this enhanced entertainment effort is looking to increase the contract that we have with a vendor to provide summertime entertainment at the resort area. You know, if you've ever gone down there and seen these street performers, or you know, the shows that are going on, that's all managed through a contract. And the goal with this is to enhance or increase those services at a point in time whenever, you know, the tourism industry is really struggling. And through this increase, the hope is that we're able to provide these enhanced services, and we have a very robust rebound in tourism season, which will allow, you know, for Virginia Beach to have that very important portion of its local economy to continue to be successful.
Okay, why was $20 million budgeted in a slush fund if every 1 cent of the property tax, $6.1 million, equals $6.1 million? Why not lower the property tax by 3 cents per $100 of assessment instead? I don't know how that offset it.
So the fund balance that I mentioned, the emergent needs fund, so it's really the equivalent of when the unexpected happens. It's kind of like almost like a rainy day fund, and the reservation of that to provide flexibility for the unknowns. So the way of thinking about this is, so you have your checking account and your savings account. Your paycheck comes into your checking account, and you use that to make your purchases, your mortgage payments, your day-to-day purchases and operations, and then what you take and you establish a savings or a reserve. But if you were to go in and lower that and use too much of that and say, okay, well, I'm going to use some of that that reserve or my savings, and I'm going to go buy this car, and well, I really can't handle that through my regular income, so I'm just going to rely on my savings. Well, over time, that's going to erode the savings because you've now used that one-time funding in an unsustainable manner. So if you were to reduce the real estate tax rate and use that one-time funding in its place for the purposes of the city's core services or, general fund services, salaries or things of that nature, then it's not going to be long before you're on an unsustainable path and you're going to not have adequate revenue to maintain those services.
When will the opening of Nemo Parkway begin?
Ooh, do we know which Nemo Parkway that we're talking about? Is it the one that was
Going down to Sandbridge?
Goes from Purchasing Road down to.
It's like, yeah, it's been in the CIP like 4 years. I know I see the construction over by Home Depot.
So is this the Nemo that I referenced as being fully funded?
Yes,
So this is the extension. So if you go through past Walmart and you're going out towards Sandbridge, the continuation of Nemo that direction?
yes.
Okay. So I know I mentioned it as being fully funded in the CIP. It won't be fully funded, and with a significant portion of the construction probably beginning until FY27 and potentially FY28. I don't have a known completion date at this point in time. I'm trying to quickly get there in my CIP document, but we got fancy and changed the numbers, and now I'm lost my page number here.
Okay. Well, 27 is a pretty long way off.
It is.
Do you want to move on to the next question? Okay, the police chief recently, on the briefing they had on what happened down at the oceanfront, said they needed more funding. City council said they will move public safety up and flooding down. Is that reflected in your budget, in your presentation? I would think not, since that was recent.
Yeah, that literally happened on Tuesday. And I know this presentation was dated 4/1. I changed the date. I actually provided this, and the proposed budget came out on March 23rd. So
that would be in a reconciliation budget, wouldn't it?
Correct.
Okay. Any changes to what you already submitted? Okay, last question. Long one. Please explain the number used to estimate the increase in residential real estate assessment and why the percentage is so much lower than the actual market, which is hot with buyers offering 5K to 20K over asking price. Shouldn't a more realistic assessment increase in property values be at least 10%? What, you want our property taxes to go up 10%? What, are you crazy?
Who wrote that? Who did that?
Yeah, censor questions like that. Forget that one.
Yeah, that's doing the opposite. I can say this though, and this is just So in the budget, whenever we estimate the revenues, so we don't control the assessments. The
Right.
assessments are done by the real estate assessor. And so what we utilize is we base our revenue projections based on what he establishes the assessments at. So, you know, I've certainly heard that mentioned before, talking about that, about the real estate market. And, you know, they're overall, it's 3.7%, but everybody's talking about, well, that's not what I'm seeing in my neighborhood. I certainly can't speak for the real estate assessor, but in that 3.7, there's more than just residential as well. So you got commercial, so you got a whole lot of different groups and changes in those, but overall citywide, 3.7%.
Could you go back to slide 8 a second? Okay. All right. Federal revenue went up 41.4%. Could you explain that?
Yes. So that's earlier. So this is the revenue slide. I had noted that the schools were appropriating the CARES Act funding, a big portion of this. So the schools grant funds, comparing the current year adopted to the proposed 22, actually is growing by about, Regina, 50 something million dollars, $54 million. And again, that's taking into account that it was not a known at the point in time the current year was adopted, and it is a known next year, and they've included that for appropriation in their operating budget. So that's the driver there.
Okay, so that's not going to be any recurring revenue because you certainly don't expect that to continue with the federal government, right? That'll be for one-time expenditure kind of stuff, not recurring expenditures. Use. Yes? No?
I mean, one would think, I'm not as overly familiar with the allowable uses of the schools grants, but I can tell you on the city side, whenever grants are awarded for a particular purpose, they are awarded from federal agencies for very specific purposes, and their reporting to the agency ensures that it's for either a project or a purpose or an initiative, and very few of those have ongoing long-term costs associated with them. I'm not as familiar with the schools in terms of what, you know, they would be allowed to do with this one-time funding, but I do agree with you. I would think that in the appropriating and the establishment of programs to expend these funds on, it would be short-term and not long-term, keeping in mind the need to sustain those services over the once the one-time funding runs out.
Okay. Well, no more questions. We thank you so much for that presentation.
All right, everybody. Thank you all, and thank you for accommodating and doing the Zoom. I really appreciate it.
Oh, no problem. Love to have you here. We'll see
Yep.
you at the public hearing.
Public hearings. We'll see you there virtually, and then after that one, I guess I'll probably see you all same about this time next year.
Yes, sir. All right.
All right, then. Thank you all.
Thank you.
You're welcome. All right. So now we're going to go on to our business meeting. Do we have a